Today on the Big 3 in 30, the Spurs take a 3-2 lead over the Timberwolves.
The San Antonio Spurs decisive, convincing 126-97 victory in Game 5.
Minnesota sits on the brink of elimination.
Biggest turning point where it all went wrong, right?
And we remember the Grizzlies' Brandon Clarke.
Definitely going to be a player who, when we think of this era of Grizzlies basketball, you got to mention Brandon Clarke's name.
This is the Big 3 in 30 NBA. The three biggest stories from the NBA from our local experts at the Locked On Podcast Network. We bring you the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 30 minutes. The Big 3 in 30 NBA starts now. Thank you for making the Big 3 in 30 your first listen of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Victor Wembanyama powered the Spurs to a Game 5 rout and a 3-2 lead over Minnesota. Casey Vieira and Devin Brown with Locked On Spurs go inside the win.
The San Antonio Spurs decisive, convincing 126-97 victory in Game 5 of the Western Conference semifinals. They have a 3-2 lead. They are one win away from getting back to the Western Conference Finals for the first time in a long time. My friend, again, it took a little bit of everybody. It was Victor. He had some moments, but to say it was just number one would be silly because it took a solid 15 to get this thing done tonight.
Absolutely. Welcome, everybody, to the show. Casey, we got some things to break down for Game 5. We're going to look forward a little bit to Game 6, a little bit. But let's have a great show. Let's do it.
This is what you'll be talking about.
All right. So as you know, Wemby kicked out of the game the other day for elbowing Naz Reid in the throat. So like I said from the jump, a lot of people were saying, oh, Victor's going to come back and he's going to have his measure of redemption and he's going to go completely nuclear on these Timberwolves because he is not happy. And through the first 6 minutes, all those people who were saying that, they were exactly correct because in the first 6 minutes of the game, not even, he scores 16 points. 16 points, and the Spurs open up a 24-9 lead. And go figure, Wemby resides to the bench, and promptly that lead gets cut all the way down to a 4-point margin at the end of the first quarter of play. Victor finishes with 18 in the first quarter at that 34-30 margin between the two. Spurs get off to a good start. Quick 9-0 spurt right off the rip to start the second quarter on high now. And it'd be kind of a continuous theme for this Spurs team to really, I guess, well, now that I say that, it was kind of runs on both sides. It really, I articulate this more now, and this was kind of really your cliche game of runs through the first three quarters. Spurs open up the second quarter on a 9-0 run, in part to Minnesota shooting 4 of 17. And as a result, the Spurs ultimately see themselves go up by 18. It's contributions not just from Victor. Keldon Johnson snapped out of his funk tonight. He had 8 points by the time they hit half, and ultimately the Spurs go up by 12 heading into the break. That's because they missed their final 8 shots heading into halftime, and they stayed equally as cool going into the other side of the break. Minnesota gets something going. And in part was because the Spurs just could not get that rhythm going in the half court at all in any capacity. And being so limited that Minnesota is on the offensive end outside of Anthony Edwards right now, the defense leading to offense is what ignites things. And ultimately 14-2 right from the second that 12-minute mark ticks down in the third quarter. And we're tied at 61. Insert Dylan Harper, insert Keldon Johnson midway through that third. And it completely changes the dynamic of the way the things were looking the rest of the way. Because after that 14-2 run to start the third, San Antonio, the rest of the quarter, check this out, closes on a 30-12 run and ultimately have an 18-point lead going into the fourth quarter. A couple flurries here and there from Minnesota to get within 11. But by the time it was, really time for the Spurs to call off the dog, so to speak, and I guess put away Minnesota for good. They did exactly that, and ultimately the math reads a 126-97 victory. Wemby, 27-17, 5 blocks or 5 assists, 3 blocks in the highly anticipated redemption matchup. Fox with 18 of 6 of 15 shooting. Keldon 21 points off the bench, his best showing of the postseason by far. Dylan Harper, 12 points, 10 rebounds, 5 of them from the offensive variety. Anthony Edwards had 20 in the defeat. It was impressive. It was impressive. They got knocked down a few times when Minnesota was off and running, and Spurs half court was looking ugly, and they responded, and they did it in a real impressive fashion.
Yeah, absolutely. To your first point, Wemby, being ejected from that game and, having to face your teammates as they're coming in after a tough loss in game 4, and then being around them for a day of practice, being on the plane, things like that, it wears on you. So as the best player, you have to step up, and that's what he did. He did that. He set the tone from the get-go. He was tremendous. We all know how Wemby is. He didn't want to let his teammates down again. So he came out, had a big game. The game itself, if you're Coach Mitch, when you get leads like that in the playoffs, you have to take it to another level and get rid of these teams, really, knock them down. But to Minnesota's credit, they were able to fight in there. And that was with their starters. Now, we've talked about this in the past where, they didn't get much out of AO, whatever. And out of, IO, whoever, and Shannon Jr. But that's the thing. That's what makes these teams good, is when your bench players on the road can kind of keep you in the game, and then your stars take over. Well, Minnesota, if you're looking at that, if you're looking at the game film, you didn't get that. You're going to need that in the next one to come back to San Antonio, just like San Antonio is going to need the others to step up and let Wemby try and win game 6. Same thing. So, and then my last point was Harper and Keldon. They were tremendous. That's what you need. I just talked about that right now. They came off the bench, Casey, and they were great. Harper was fantastic, not only offensively, but defensively. The blocks, the deflections. So, Casey, when you look at this, the Spurs did what they were supposed to do, take care of home, win game 5. Now, when you're going on the road, you should feel comfortable, Mitch should, with some of these guys coming off the bench. And if they have to play heavy minutes, you should feel good about that.
Yeah, Stephon Castle, he finished with 17 points, 4 boards, 6 assists. Minnesota was very hampered on the offensive side of the ball, even more so than what it has been. Ant played 39 minutes, and that was even kind of in a blowout situation. So if this game was competitive, there's a world that he probably would have finished with right around 45, so to speak. But Julius Randle gave them nothing. I don't want to say nothing, but close to 6 of 17 from the field. Rudy Gobert pretty much got played off the floor tonight and felt like complete non-factor. Wemby was going at him, in that first quarter, that barrage. Maybe that's exactly what Victor needed to see. Right across from him. And I wonder if that kind of played a factor, because Victor from the jump, I really wouldn't be surprised if that part ignited it too, knowing that Gobert was in front of him, because Rudy, who has played okay in this series, who hasn't had a bad series, Gobert, but tonight, I mean, Victor just ate him up.
Yeah, well, Casey, I got to protect the player sometimes when, you heavyweights in the media, you guys go after certain players. But let's remember who he was guarding in the first series, the Joker. So he played tremendous. He's been tremendous up until this point. Hey, but at some point, Rudy's got to come back to earth. And that was tonight, Casey. I just wanted to mention that.
He did. In many respects. Spurs shoot 53% from the field this evening. They win the glass 50-42. Obviously big in that capacity. Minnesota held to less than 30% from 3, 27% from distance, 39 overall. Let's revisit that stretch in the middle of the third quarter, spearheaded by Keldon, spearheaded by Dylan Harper, which really turned things for the better.
Time to reveal where the game was won or lost. It's the turning point.
And for as well as the Spurs have played in this postseason, in these playoffs so far, Keldon largely, for the most part, has not really been a contributing factor to it. He's had his moments, but especially in this series, he's had a really hard time getting into that flow, whether it be the struggles just going, that bull in China shop doesn't particularly work great when you have Rudy and Randall and McDaniels
Yeah.
waiting for you at the finish line. And he
Right.
never really was able to get into that flow through the first 4 games, it felt like. But tonight, he made his first 2 buckets. I think he needed that. And that settled him real solid. And then the rest of the way, when you got Dylan Harper out there, right there with you, igniting that fire, making you feel good, it helps in the cause. So it was good to see KJ bounce back tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Him and Harper were tremendous. And that's why we picked those guys for the turning point, because you saw it right there in that third quarter, Casey. He was playing his day. What I'm seeing out of the starters is these junk defenses, right? Where they're switching, they're double teaming and things like that. When you come in with Harper and Keldon, you're not having to do that. Now you have 5 solid guys out there playing defense. There's not a whole lot of overhelp, and that's what Minnesota is struggling with. And for about 3 or 4 minutes, they really struggled with that. The Spurs were able to pull, get a good lead, and, from there. So when you talk about, what Harper and Keldon did offensively, really, for me, it was really big, because you stack stops, 1 stop, 2, 3, 4, and that's why they were able to pull away.
Let's talk about where things kind of went wrong, I guess, prior to that, which the events that essentially prompted them to go to Harper, go to Keldon, and ignite things. Minnesota went into a 2-3 zone, and just knocked the Spurs out of whack.
Right.
They were all over the place.
Right.
Castle and Fox, excuse me. It felt like they were just kind of taking turns. I just said halfback dive. What they were doing, it was just going right into the paint, and and as a result, the way Minnesota is going to win these games, because they're so thin on the offensive side of the basketball right now, is to take advantage of your errant shots and your poor shot selection, which is exactly what it was in those first few minutes. It was awful. I think I actually texted you too. I was apparently they forgot Victor existed.
Yeah.
They completely veered away from him.
Hey, sometimes your eyesight messes up and you can't see the 7'5" guy. I don't know. It's weird. Yeah, it happens to you. Your vision, but it's crazy because you did text me that, and I'm just sitting there looking, and I'm like, no, what it is these guys are, you hear all these things about, hey, don't just go to Vic. Don't just go to Vic. Well, they were trying to force it to him, a lob here, a lob there, trying to get it to him. Minnesota is like sitting in a zone, and that's what made Tom Brady so good for years, is you got to pick apart that zone. But, De'Aaron Fox and Castle were not Tom Brady, so they kept turning it over. And then Mitch calls timeout, and the first play out of a timeout, which is very important to a coach, they turn it over again, trying to hit Victor in the middle of the lane. So that's what prompted Mitch to get those guys out of there, right? But it just seemed like, they were trying to get it to Wemby, and then they were doing their own thing, trying to get in the lane. Minnesota's on a run, and then they push the ball up and try and get in the lane again. Yeah, that's going to be a downfall. You can't have that in Game 6. You got to, make sure that you value the ball, value possessions. So it's going to be interesting to see, because really the rest of the time, you can't have those lapses, not for 5, 6, 7 minutes.
They went on a stretch in the middle of the third quarter there, where, actually, if you continue it to the back end, where they missed 8 consecutive shots to end the second, they missed 12 of 13. Excuse me, it was 13 of 14, and then 1 of 6 before Mitch made the sub, brought in Harper and Keldon, and the rest of the night wrote itself out from there. But it was listen, every playoff win is a good win. You take it. I was going to say it's a good win, beyond good win. And now a chance to do something they haven't done, like we said, get back to the Western Conference Finals for the first time in nearly a decade.
The NBA playoffs are here, and every possession matters. If you're looking to get even closer to the action, FanDuel has a great offer to get you started. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. That's right. Turn $5 into $150 in bonus bets just for getting started. I like using FanDuel during the playoffs because everything I need is right there in one place. You can check stats, trends, and matchups before making your picks, which makes the whole experience feel a lot more informed. Whether you're looking at player props or following your favorite stars, it adds another level of excitement to every game. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. FanDuel, play your game. Welcome back to the Big 3-30 NBA. Minnesota got buried in Game 5 by San Antonio as Victor Wembanyama and the Spurs pushed the Wolves to the brink. Ben Beacon with Locked On Wolves breaks down what went wrong.
Lots to get into here, Jack. Biggest turning point, where it all went wrong, right? Biggest second guess, plus what we'll be talking about tomorrow. Let's just jump right into it, though. Game 5 back in San Antonio. You sent me this earlier in the day. In NBA postseason history, Game 5 winners have gone on to win 82% of the time when tied 2 apiece in a best-of-7 series, according to ESPN research. Something to keep in mind, obviously, as we watch this one unfold the way it did. Rough first half for the Wolves, just a lot of lethargic offense, no ball movement, no creativity, too many turnovers. Defense wasn't much better. They go into the locker room down 12. Spurs led as many as 18 in that first half. Second half, Wolves come out, huge surge, blink of an eye, don't get up, go to the bathroom because they're tied back up at 61 apiece. Unfortunately, though, that was about as good as it got. 30-12 explosion by the Spurs. That just kind of sent the Wolves spiraling. They could never really crawl their way back from that. Wolves now in do-or-die territory back at home Friday night. But, Jack, what stuck out the most here? What's top of your mind right now from a big picture lens after this?
Yeah, top of my mind, big picture lens. I just think that it feels like this series is pretty cooked for the Wolves, just in the sense that the margins are just razor thin, and the non-negotiable for the Timberwolves in this series is that you got to play hard and got to play more physical. And in this series, I think that the team that's played harder and played more physical has won every single game. And the difference is that when the Wolves do that, they can eke out games, and when the Spurs do that, they can run you off the floor. And it's just really hard to win a basketball game in the postseason when you dig yourself a huge hole early on the road, right? 22-4 run, put the Wolves in a 15-point hole. Victor Wembanyama was fantastic in his return to the floor. Had 16 points in that first quarter. And then from there, just felt like the Spurs played way harder than the Wolves, especially on the glass, right? I mean, through 3 quarters, Dylan Harper is what, a 6'5", 6'6" guard, had as many offensive rebounds, 5 as the entire Timberwolves team, again, through the third quarter. In this game tonight, Rudy and Ant each only had 2 defensive rebounds, which is pretty putrid. And again, just to speak to the physicality, I love the way that Keldon Johnson came in and played for the Spurs off the bench. Was really intentional about trying to beat guys off the dribble, get into the paint, use his shoulders and his off arm to be able to create space and finish inside. And again, you're looking for guys that can do that. I mean, the Wolves have Naz Reid, the Spurs have Keldon Johnson, and tonight Johnson got the better of Reid in that aspect. And so that was a huge energy boost for them. And to think that, they had 2 guys coming off the bench and Johnson and Harper, that gave them 33 points was pretty massive. And the Wolves tonight, just 23 bench points. So that was an issue as well. And then, to go on top of the effort piece, just guys aren't getting back. And when guys are getting back, there are just so many cross matches for San Antonio that allow them to, be able to more effectively hunt guys defensively and make it harder for the Timberwolves to set up their defense the way that they are, right? I mean, you can't lose on the glass and in transition. The Wolves lost 50-42 on the glass and 19-14 in transition. So those 2 things are problematic. And then just, I thought offensively, right? Obviously it's important to remember the context of Ant not being 100% and not trying to go too hard on him. But And obviously that he didn't get the requisite help that he needed, especially from Randall and Jaden McDaniels early in the game and Rudy Gobert, et cetera. But Ant makes his own life a lot harder, and that he walks the ball up the floor and then stops 2 feet inside the half court line, playing right into what the Spurs want to do. It basically turns a double team into a triple team, because not only do you have the 2 defenders in front of you, but then you have to worry about the half court line. It makes it much harder to make passes to the next defender and then the next offensive teammate up top. And then it makes it harder for that guy to either drive or pass to another teammate because he's so far away from the basket. And so again, that just I think puts the Wolves in a place where they're not starting their kind of offensive sets early enough in the shot clock. I mean, there's 11 seconds left in the shot clock before anybody tries to do anything with the basketball, which is obviously not what you want. And I think it's an area, excuse me, where they really miss Dante DiVincenzo, right?
Yeah,
I think obviously his 3-point shooting would be huge right beside that double team, but I think Dante also just does things quick, whether he does things right or wrong, makes a good play or a turnover or whatever, he does it quickly. And I appreciate that. And then for Ant as well, only three 3-point attempts in this game just can't happen, and only 13 shot attempts. I think a lot of people will cape and say, Ant's getting doubled the whole entire time, but he did not work hard enough off the ball to get off to, fight off defenders and get open. And I think a lot of that stemmed to do with how tired he was. And I think for Ant, I think these 2 days off are going to be really big for him. And I think that the Wolves just need a more aggressive version of Ant if they're going to be successful and force a game 7, right? And, outside of Ant, the margin is just razor thin, Luke. I mean, you can't have 3 guys that give you nothing. I mean, Julius Randle gave you nothing. It was a classic Randle, start playing hard once the game's out of reach in the fourth quarter. Rudy Gobert gave you absolutely nothing. TJ Shannon almost gave you nothing. At least he made some good passes, had 4 assists in this game. And then lastly, injuries. I thought Ayo Dosunmu looked by far the best he's looked since he came back. So that's obviously, a good thing for the Wolves to hopefully try to, have another guy in the backcourt that can do something. And then Dylan Harper, I thought looked awfully limited the first, 2.5 quarters, but then closed the game really strong for San Antonio. So hopefully he'll be all right for the rest of the series for them, and then potentially into the Western Conference Finals. But yeah, for the Wolves, just boils down to Ant playing into the Spurs' hands, Julius Randle not doing anything to help Ant out, not playing hard enough, and getting out physical. And those are all tough things. To put in a game and expect to be able to win a game on the road.
The postseason is heating up, and DoorDash has a way to keep fans in their bag the whole way through. Whether you're watching the highlights, the tunnel fits, or just your favorite player, DoorDash makes the entire season more fun. Because every player has their bag, with DoorDash, fans have one too. DoorDash keeps your snacks stocked, your gear fresh, and your watch party vibes absolutely on point. There are nights where your team stresses you out. Let DoorDash become your post-game therapy. Sometimes you just need dessert now. Those late-night interviews hit, and suddenly you need chips at midnight? DoorDash is built exactly for that. From tip-off to overtime, stay in your bag and order on DoorDash. Get snacks, drinks, gear, whatever gets you through the season delivered right to your door. DoorDash, in your bag all season long. Welcome back to the Big 3 and 30 NBA. The Grizzlies and the NBA community are remembering Brandon Clarke, who died at 29 after 7 seasons in Memphis. DeMichael Cole and Joe Molinax with Locked On Grizzly honor his impact.
Brandon Clarke, if you haven't heard, I'm not sure how you wouldn't have heard by now, but if you haven't heard, Brandon Clarke is dead at the age of 29. We'll leave the how and the why and all that stuff, for further conversations. DeMichael and I thought this was an extremely important time just for this to kind of be a space, hopefully in the comments. Hit us up on X at DeMichael C, at Joe Molinax. Memories of Brandon. There's been so many cool stories that I've read. DeMichael, part of it was in your story that you wrote. And I'm so glad that your version of the news is the one that kind of went viral, because I do think that there was some national attention to this. We won't mention any names that was lacking, if I'm being honest. I thought yours was excellent, and I'm glad that so many folks shared your version of this tragic news. Because we'll talk about the basketball aspect of things here in a little bit, but I want to lead off, with something that you would know a lot better than me and a lot better than many people. And that's Brandon Clarke, the person, having covered him for the last several years. So many tributes from teammates, former teammates, other media members, people that have interacted with him. This is a basketball podcast, and we'll talk about the type of player that he was, but I do think it's important to remember that these are human beings that we cover on a day in and day out basis. And it sounds like Brandon Clarke was a pretty special one.
Yeah, this is a tough one, Joe. This is a tough one for Memphis. This is a tough one for the community, for the organization. This is a tough one for the NBA, and basketball in general. Brandon Clarke, as you said, he was a guy who was in the league for 7 years, and over 7 years, you form relationships, and you form an identity that comes beyond being a player in the NBA. You hear players in the NBA always talk about how the league is a brotherhood, and you think about his connections through Gonzaga, being a first round pick, working out with certain guys, with certain sharing agency with a lot of players who are in the NBA right now, with Priority Sports being one of the biggest agencies in the NBA, and you factor all of that in, and this is a huge loss for the league. But when you localize it, covering Brandon Clarke for myself over the last 4 or 5 years, tremendous opportunity. We were the same age. He was about a month and a half older than me. And, I just remember, his last birthday. And we were actually, I think a day or two before his birthday, we were at one of his fundraising events. And in that event, he told me at the time that he was starting his own foundation, the Brandon Clarke Foundation, and did that event just a couple days before his birthday. Was the first time that he kind of was publicly doing, a donation of some sort. But uh, yeah, it's sad for so many reasons. I mean, you think about what this means to his teammates, what he's meant to his teammates over the course of the years. As a member of the media, I always there's always something about guys being approachable, right? Guys being willing to talk, and sometimes I could read Brandon Clarke's face, and it's like, oh, you had a tough game today, and I walk up to him like, right, you got a couple seconds, and he never told me no. He never told me no, and no matter how hard it would be, after certain games, right? And that is something that I personally appreciated over the course of the time. But then there's just there's layers to these humans, and it's something that I know there are other reporters as well, but I always try to highlight the layers, of these players, the things beyond basketball that correlate to the person who is the basketball player, right? And Brandon Clarke had those layers to him, whether it was his foundation where he talked about it, he wanted to help mothers, he wanted to help the Memphis community and things like that, whether it was his love for music, as you see me write about over the years, and it was something he shared with a lot of his Grizzlies teammates, and whether it was this lackadaisical approach that he had towards certain things that some guys would often care about. I remember one of the stories, that I wrote a few years ago, and it was about the shoes, right? And it was about the idea that certain players wear certain shoes when they play against certain players. This was kind of a big thing in the NBA for years, and I remember talking to like Tyus Jones and Kyle Anderson and all these older guys, and they were like, "Yeah, we don't wear, I don't wear this guy's shoes when I'm playing against him. I don't wear this guy's shoes when I'm playing against him." And he was like, "Hey, I don't care if I'm playing against Kevin Durant. I mean, I wear KDs. I'm gonna wear them." And that just stood out to me because that was his approach to even other things that if he didn't care about something, it was like, hey, so be it. I don't care if everybody else makes it a big thing. But there's so much just to uncover, unpack, and happy to get into any of it. But I mean, the love of music, which he shared with a lot of Grizzlies players. I know I wrote stories about that in the past. The relationships, right? I think about him and Jaren Jackson Jr. That was one that was really special as a friendship. But as you've talked about, as I've talked about, as others have talked about, we saw it translate on the floor. We used to always talk about the two-man lineups when the Grizzlies had Jaren Jackson Jr. and Brandon Clarke on the floor. But that wasn't just something that they thrived in on the floor. Off the floor, they were best friends. They did almost everything together in their times in Memphis. But yeah, this is tough. This is a tough blow. You talk about a guy who spent 7 years with the Grizzlies. Tied with Ja Morant is the longest tenured player. Didn't play much this past season. Obviously had, some hiccups, off the court, with the arrest and things like that. But, Joe, I've always been this way, and I really don't care, how others feel about it, because personally, I grew up around people who made some mistakes, in their lives, whether it be arrest or whatever the case may be. But some of those people that probably from the outside looking in would be judged a certain way, me having a close-up view with them, I know the real. I know what type of person they really are on the inside and out, and how caring they can be, no matter what type of charges they accumulated in the past. I wouldn't say no matter, but despite the charges that they've accumulated in the past, to a degree. And I say that because you're going to have people who talk about Brandon Clarke's situation over the past month or so, and kind of try to make some tie-ins and whatnot. But I also just want to point out the fact that this is a guy that I've covered for 5 seasons, and he's been a bright player to cover in that time. He's been a bright player in the Grizzlies locker room, and it's just been someone that I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to cover over these last few years.
That's all for today's Big 3 and 30 NBA. If you follow football or college sports, the Big 3 and 30 has shows for the biggest news in the NFL and on campus going up every weekday just like this one. Just search the Big 3 and 30 NFL or the Big 3 and 30 College, wherever you're listening or watching now. Thanks again for tuning in to the Big 3 and 30 NBA.